Good versus evil, to the death. His strength and agility surprised me at first, but I had to remain focused. Any distraction could cost me my life. I had to podcast with all my senses, acting as one.
What's happening, Hellspawn? Welcome to Spawnography, another episode, another delightful intro. My name is George Marston. My pronouns are they, them, or she, her. And with me, as always, for another episode is my co-host,
Pierce Leiden. My pronouns are they, them. We're doing 2 more issues of Spawn.
That's literally what I was about to say. We're doing another 2-issue arc by the Todd Father. We chatted briefly about this at the beginning, and I think something that's kind of funny is that we had a little bit of a split opinion on this arc.
Yeah, we're definitely kind of in the I don't want to say the dog days of Spawn, as it is 350 issues long.
Yeah, we just hit 350, and this is 14. So
right.
We've got a few left to go. We'll be doing this podcast for a while.
But we are clearly out of the Cocoa Swiss. The Cocoa Swiss. We're out of the Cocoa Swiss, as we were last arc as well. And where Todd is experimenting. I think that now a lot of things are in place. We know who Spawn is. We get his sort of deal. We know who the villain is, kinda. We know about the characters, and we're moving. I mean,
we're going back to the same plot that they've been skirting around since issue 1 and putting a little dent in it. And the funny thing is, some of the real payoff of that story won't even come in these issues. It'll just be referenced, and it's something that we'll see theoretically later in a different context. I just want to say before we get started, I love that the light coming to your window there, it looks like you're podcasting from inside J.J. Abrams' Enterprise. Like,
fun fact, I am.
Oh, okay, cool.
Actually,
man,
yeah,
got
JJ
in.
And I we're old friends, and
wow.
Sometimes I like to use his old sets, but that's fine.
You got into Starfleet. That's incredible. You know, I was actually rejected from the School for Gifted Youngsters back to when they did, I think it was X-Men Apocalypse. They had a 1-800 call-in line that you could call into, and it would be like, leave your name and number to apply for admission to Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. And I got a fucking rejection letter. Like, I got a rejection card. And the thing is, at first I thought, oh, well, everybody probably got rejected. No. Some people got in.
No, the thing is Ben Grimm.
Cute. All right. Some people got in. So I was not cool enough. Whatever my mutant power is, which is probably remembering comic book facts, it wasn't good enough to get me into the school. So anyway, we're going to talk about Spawn. Spawn issue 14. You've got the credits for us, Pierce.
I do have the credits. We're going to get into Spawn number 14. This is Myths Part 1. Story and art, Todd McFarlane. Letters and editor, Tom Orzechowski. Color by Steve Olive, Ruben Oleoptics. And Oleoptics is Tracy Anderson, Denise Bien, Kathy Ennis, Emily Jordan, Patty Stratton Jordan, Kirk Mobert, Abel Mountain, Leah Rude, Marie Rude, Mo Sampson, Quinn Suplee, and William Zindel. This issue is dedicated to Jim Salicrup.
Jim Salicrup was a longtime Marvel Comics editor. He was the guy who hired Todd McFarlane to draw Spawn way back in the 80s, to draw Spider-Man way back in the 80s, which led to Spawn later on when Todd McFarlane got sick of working for him.
A really fun thing about the Jim Salicrup Wikipedia is that, one, it says worked at Marvel Comics for 20 years. And then the next line is, started at Marvel Comics at age 15. I am currently 35. I can't imagine having a 20-year career at Marvel already.
I want to
That
say
seems
he probably came in under Roy Thomas. Yeah, he sure did.
yeah, it's with Roy Thomas. Yeah,
Who was also like Wonderkind. He was like Stan Lee's 15-year-old gopher or whatever. So there's a long
Roy Thomas, Jim Shooter, and Jim Salicrup, just a bunch of little teenagers
Jerry
doing work.
Conway.
Oh yeah,
He was like Jerry Conway was like like 19 or in his early 20s when he was hired to write Spider-Man back in the 70s, which is why his issues are really good.
Anyway,
yeah. To talk about the comic this podcast is about.
We get opening page on issue 14 is another big Violator splash.
Technically clown.
True, right. He's in clown form kind of forever now.
Yeah.
He can't turn into his demon form.
But we're going to talk a lot about the demon form, yeah.
Yeah. Malbolgia cursed him the last time that he was kind of on panel.
That was back in Spawn number 4, as the editor will note on one of these pages.
Yeah. It does seem like... Okay, so here's my overall thoughts on this arc. It feels a little bit like everybody's getting tired. Like, I don't think the Orzakowski letters are where they have been in the past. I'm pretty sure that Todd McFarlane has never seen teeth in a mouth.
I was gonna say he looks a little bit like little Bubby Child or something here. Like he's got more gums than teeth.
Yeah, which is kind of a thing that when he does it with other characters, I understand it, or when he's trying to do it with like a horrific character, I sort of get it. So it makes sense for Violator.
Yeah.
This is wild. I would like a dentist to comment on this mouth.
He has about 65 teeth in there. Like he's got like a shark's mouth for real.
And as we'll find out later, he is 3'10".
Yes, 3'10".
So he is very specifically
he's
small.
A tiny guy.
But he has a huge mouth and lots of teeth.
Yeah, Short King, the clown.
Basically, clown's telling a story to some kids. Why these 3 kids are hanging out in an alleyway with an adult tiny person with clown makeup on it, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, it's a little creepy.
None of it makes a ton of sense.
No, it doesn't. It's clown basically entreating these kids to listen to his story, where it's sort of a weird self-aggrandizing story he's gonna tell. And again, he's got this like monologue where he's basically telling these kids he's gonna tell them a story about a guy who's like the baddest, meanest, toughest. A guy who makes Schwarzenegger and Stallone and Van Damme look like the Three Stooges. And the kids are like, we don't give a shit. These young millennials.
Yet they are hanging out in the alleyway.
I think later the narration says they're denizens of the alley. So they may be young, unhoused children, which, the epidemic of unhoused children in our nation is a very real thing. I don't think Todd McFarlane's trying to cast light on that here, but...
Question for you.
Mm-hmm.
There's a kid in an ILM hat.
Yes.
An ILM, for anybody that doesn't know, is George Lucas's like special effects house.
Industrial Light and Magic, yeah.
Right. Is that Todd McFarlane?
I don't know. It might be. And then next to him is a kid wearing a Jurassic Park shirt.
Editor Pierce here. We are dumbasses, and a quick Google search would have revealed to us that Steve Spaz Williams, Clint Goldman, and Mark DePay, who worked on the Spawn movie, are the kids here. Anyway, the more you know.
Yep, which we've seen. This is now like 2 issues in a row of Jurassic Park references. So I mean that's like of the time.
It was like this was the summer. So maybe Todd just saw it and was like, "Yeah, I want to put some Jurassic Park in there." That's what kids like these days. They love Industrial Light and Magic.
They definitely know what that is.
The third kid is wearing a Canadian do-rag. So like he's displaced from Toronto. He came downstate to the city.
He, funnily enough, too. We've talked about hands a lot. He does the Spawn hands a little bit,
Mhm.
where his
These
middle and
claw
yeah,
hands.
he's got his middle and his ring finger kind of
Todd loves
touching.
drawing these little fingies, and it's like it's a very like Alphonse Mucha kind of like finger posing sort of thing. Which, like, if you ever look at Mucha, is obviously a very famous Art Nouveau artist. You've
He drew
definitely
like
seen his
Spider-Man,
advertising.
or
Yeah, Alphonse Mucha drew the second 50 issues of
oh,
Spider-Man.
gotcha. Okay.
He later was the art director. No, I'm sorry, that's John Romita. Alphonse Mucha was a Art Nouveau artist, and he draws a lot of these very posed hands that look like fingers in motion, like in a very specific place, and that's very often what they look like. And those kind of half curled, touching fingers like that. That's a very like not derivative, but definitely that kind of posing is very like Mucha inspired, known for his
I
hands.
will say also that these children don't really look like children. They kind of look like the X babies. Like, you know how the
Yeah,
X
that's
babies
true.
just kind of look like tiny versions of the X-Men? These children just look like tiny versions of adults, but not children.
And that's even more prominent in the second issue when we pick up the story and we see them. I think that's when it says they're denizens of the alleys, and they look like they've grown about 5 years in the time that that Violator's been telling the story, much like the audience and the time it takes to do this. So yeah, he's talking to these kids. They're like, "We don't give a shit about your stupid story, you weird old clown. We just want to hang out in our alley in peace." Which, to be fair, these kids look like they were maybe only a few years older than me in 1993, and I did spend a lot of time just hanging out,
In
like sitting
alley.
on dumpsters and alleys and shit. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, just dirtbag life. But yeah, so he's like, I'm going to tell you the story. And they're like, no, you're not. And he's like, well, what if I give you money? So he says, I know you don't have time for anybody but yourselves, you little punks. I should kill the whole lot of you, but I kind of admire your pussy attitude. I think he means like your pussy attitude, but not how I read it. So he just throws a wad of money at these kids, and they're like, "Yeah, all right, well, listen to your story for money," which also rings very true to me in a sort
Yeah.
of half,
Listen, if
joking
there
way.
was anything that was going to be able to get me a couple more issues at the comic book store, or like
The
some
stories I
chunky,
wanted, yeah.
yeah, like, yeah, I will listen to you talk to me if you're going to give me $5. I get it. So
There is something a little unsettling though about this creepy clown being able to just pay kids to listen to him. Like
it's weird. So this is kind of the problem that I have with this arc, right? It is set up as Clown just doing this, and I know that he like kind of like lost his powers at the end of the last time we saw him. It feels a little superfluous, like we're not really moving the story along. We're not moving the chains, as it were.
right. It is another sidetrack. Like that's what I will say about it.
It's also like a weird way to frame the story,
It
because
is.
because so he's going to tell this story about like medieval Spawn, who we saw in Neil Gaiman's issue. It could just be an issue of medieval Spawn. We don't really need the table setting of Violator at this
Well,
point.
I think that's the thing about it, is that it's a double-edged sword. Much like medieval Spawn's massive, gigantic, jagged blade on the next splash page here. The story itself, both in meta terms, like the story in the comic and the story as Violator is telling it, are kind of this double-edged sword where on one hand, this is another distraction. Like it really is. It's just another two issues where they're not doing anything that actually has to do with furthering the plot of Spawn. And that's especially rough coming after 4 issues of the Coco Swiss. The Coco Swiss. Then it seems like there was another arc that was kind of the same thing, like wheel spinning. And what happens in this arc is Violator tells the story, and he realizes at the end that he has a realization at the end about how the murders he committed in the first arc of Spawn, where he was stealing the hearts, ripping out the hearts of mobsters, how they're being interpreted by the press. And he doesn't like that. The thing is, the question of who took these mobsters' hearts and who killed them has, as of issue 14 here, been running for 10 issues. And every bit of progress we've gotten on it is someone mentioning someone stole all those mobsters, someone ripped out those mobsters' hearts. I don't know why I keep saying he stole them. That's a funny way to say it. Someone ripped out those mobsters' hearts. Remember that? And then people going, yeah, we better get back to that plot. And then not.
I think the frustrating thing for us as readers is that we are in issue 14. These were relatively on time for an Image comic. This is September of 1993. I think Spawn debuts in May of 1992.
Yeah.
Okay, we're pretty on point. We're a couple months off maybe, but like we got in a previous issue. It's been 3 weeks or whatever.
It's now been another week. We know it's now been about a month since issue 1 of Spawn.
Yeah.
In terms of comic book time. In real world time, it's been over a year. You're right about that. And that's one of the sides of this that's very frustrating.
Yeah, as a reader, it is frustrating to be like, so we haven't gotten anywhere. And I understand like the Billy Kincaid thing kind of happens in the middle of this. We got a few issues that are sort of at a time during the Coco Swiss.
The Coco Swiss.
The weird thing is that aside from Medieval Spawn, we don't really get any Spawn. And also, Medieval Spawn kind of sucks.
Well, I like Medieval Spawn, strictly as a visual, I guess. As a character, it's very flat. This is definitely like a fairy tale. And it definitely feels like Todd picking up that fairy tale baton that Neil Gaiman Neil Gaiman seemed to really be riding that first issue where we met Violator with that kind of fairy tale structure. Very archetypal, very, storyteller kind of feeling. Todd seems to echo that here. And that's the other side of the sword, and the double-edged sword to me is I actually really like the story in the sense that it's a really fun way to play with the medium of comics that works in comics in a way that it doesn't always work in other media. And the thing that happens in this story is Violator tells his version of an encounter with Medieval Spawn, how it goes, how they fight, how he, in his terms, wins the battle. And the thing that's interesting is, as he's telling this story, we get his narration, which is just the exact opposite of what we're seeing on the page. And what we're seeing on the page is Medieval Spawn riding into a town where he's hailed as a hero because he just slew some demon or something that was bothering the town. But Violator is framing him as an evil wizard who must be destroyed, and Violator is painting himself as the hero in the situation. And I think that sort of, it's not a Rashomon, but that disconnect between the narration by Violator and the actual tale that's being told, which we're seeing, quote unquote, the truth in the art, while the lie is being told in the text. I think that's a fun way to play with the medium. And the other thing I like about it is the tale that Violator is telling is the real version of it that we're seeing, the actual events that's depicted in the art and not in his narration, is just kind of a little folk horror kind of story about a knight trying to save his girlfriend from an evil demon. And the only thing that really makes that more interesting than the simple archetypal story it is the disconnect with the narration, where it's Violator lying. And I think at one point in the narration it says the only victims in the story are, Violator and the truth or something like that. And I thought that was a fun line. But I think that part of the story is interesting, and I think it's fun not because of the kind of generic like knight versus demon kind of story, but because of the way the story is told, and that is charming to me.
So I understand where you're coming from, but at the same time, I do think that the story is so generic that even though he's lying and we're getting like he's like we clearly can see that on the page,
Right.
doesn't tell us anything. It's not like he reveals some power that he has that we didn't know he had before. It's not like it reveals some power that Spawn has that he didn't have before. I mean, I get,
I guess
yeah,
he's breathed fire before. We've seen him breathe fire
it
before, I
doesn't,
guess,
but
haven't
but
we?
also him breathing fire doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it's
Like
like sort of a
it
more
just like
clever.
it
It's
just
like a little clever quote unquote thing at the end.
it feels like Todd working backwards from a thing. Like if there is medieval Spawn, there must be medieval Violator. What's a dragon?
Right. So that
Maybe
winds
it's
up being the
Violet.
punchline of the story. We'll just kind of spoil it because going through this page by page, as we often do, we'll get to it. But basically, the end result is Violator breathes fire all over medieval Spawn, and in Violator's words, this is how he becomes the inspiration for fire breathing dragons in medieval and
Yeah.
like Middle Ages depictions of stories and tapestries and what have you. And that's doesn't work for a lot of reasons. There's like it's a clever kind of cool idea that Todd probably thought was like really good, like oh I'll make him a dragon, and it kind of works. But when you realize that they're talking about 800 years ago, like 1100 AD around that time, 1100 CE, I should say. I'm sorry. You start to realize that like dragons were depicted long before that, especially in cultures outside of Western European and Middle European depictions. It's just one of those things that it's not as clever as it probably felt like to the guy writing and drawing it.
Yeah. The thing that I think hits more than anything else in this issue is the art.
Yes,
I
I
think the art
agree
is
with you
kind of
there.
great all the way through. So we get that big splash of medieval Spawn. We kind of get to move through the story. The stuff with Violator is really fun. Violator does not seem super fun to draw, like
He's very
because he's
weird to draw.
yeah, and having to think about his body in space seems tough. Todd
But Todd
fucking goes for it. It rules. And I love his weird jaw, his like weird distended like jaw that comes out way too far.
yeah, he really leans into the absurdity of it in a lot of ways.
I love the rough panel edges on stuff. My favorite panel, I think of probably both issues, is the panel where he's eating the heart.
Another weirdly drawn little softball with noodles on it heart.
It's fine, it's fine. It's a heart. We get it. But
Yeah.
like that looks sick.
Yeah.
I'm terrified of that guy.
Yeah.
You
That's a
know?
great looking version of Violator. And one thing I like about it is that it's not a physiology that makes any sense. I think that Todd kind of was like, fuck it. He doesn't have to make physical sense. His mouth doesn't have to work the way a mouth works. He's a demon. It's there's a certain weird Looney Tunes quality to him that I think really works. And I think you're right that it's some of the most interesting work Todd's done on some of these issues in a while.
And I think also too, if the it also is weirdly like a missed opportunity. I think he kind of does it where the um, panel facing it immediately is Violator's like clown face.
Yeah.
I wish he was able to echo and do a full like half and half almost. Because a couple of the panels here, like, or the middle panel, really, the third panel, where it's just like the overhead shot of Clown. I'm like, I could take this or leave this. It could be anything. You could probably
Yeah.
photocopy this into a bunch of different issues, and it would be fine.
Yeah. I mean, the art on the pages, we skipped a couple pages here. Basically, what happens, I do want to point out as we're digging into the art, Medieval Spawn's sword is another one of those blades that's just like no sword could look like this. It looks like Mall Ninja sword. It looks like one of those things you get from the Bud K catalogs that other 90s edgelords will definitely know what I'm talking about. But like
Well, if
it
you study the blade, you'll know what we're talking about.
while a lot of people were out partying, I was definitely studying the Bud K catalog. This this sword also has a knife, or has a handle on it. This sword has a knife. What a sentence. This sword has a handle on it that's like the size of a fucking hoagie. It's like a baguette handle. And like it's just so weirdly absurdly out of place on this, but like every panel of Spawn where you see it, it's just so comical in a way that it almost ruins this like early splash page of medieval Spawn sitting there in his armor with his sword. But you know, whatever. I do like this 2-page sequence where it's basically showing Violator going through and like ripping through the village that medieval Spawn protects.
Yeah, it's
Like,
good.
you know,
It's
it's
good
fun.
because Violator looks like Violator is goofy looking, but he is scary
It's
and he looks
scary,
cool.
and you imagine like, you know, being a medieval peasant and this fucking thing's tearing you apart. The coloring on these panels are kind of nice. The one where it's mostly red with Violator in full color kind of standing out.
Yeah.
I like these pages. I think it's because I enjoy, like you said, the way the Violator is depicted in them. I think it's it's cool to see Todd kind of cut loose and draw like a weird monster.
I gotta give a shout out to the compendium because so I don't have issue 15 as a single issue right now. It's in the mail. I did not get it in time, and so I read both these issues in the compendium, and the colors are solid. Like they're pretty true to the print versions, um, which is rare. Folks who have the Walter Simonson Thor omnibus know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, it's especially those recolored Marvel ones.
Ugh,
Marvel doesn't always hit the mark
terrible.
on that. I wanna just I don't want to focus on that. It'll bring me to tears. But
There are a
that is
lot
an
of bad
interesting.
recolors. Digital recolors are fucking bad, and in a weird way, I wish that we could just go back.
We all do.
Because I actually think that modern coloring, there are very few modern colorists who are great. I think there are a lot of modern colorists who are serviceable.
You don't
There
know a
are,
lot of colorist names. I mean, but I guess that's also been traditionally they're an undersung part of the
when
industry in
you know
some
their
ways.
name, it's because they're great or
Yes.
because they are awful.
Yeah, that's true.
I would say top of the pops right now for me is Mike Spicer, who
Great
does
colorist.
a great colorist, does a lot of the Daniel Warren Johnson stuff. I just read Do a
Yeah.
Power Bomb. So
Mm.
anyway, this is like a little sidestep. Uh,
But this was also in the early days of like when digital coloring was becoming more and more prominent. And so I think preserving what the pages were intended to look like in a reprint is a lot easier.
I agree. I agree.
But
Um,
moving forward, you know, Violator has his fun teasing these kids with his story. And as he's trying to tell them that he's immortal, they're like, you know, who's this boss of yours? He's got to be pretty powerful to keep himself alive after all these years. And he says, surely you've read the Bible. And the kid says, you mean you're one of God's disciples? And he says, please get with the program. Here's a clue. Recall the other direction. And that is a segue into a
Great
little
segue.
scene. It is a fun segue. That's why I read it out. Into a segue where Sam and we catch up with our two detectives, Sam and Twitch, and Sam is saying, hell, I feel good because he and Twitch have just come off of probation. They were on probation for a little while because Billy Kincaid, the child murderer who Spawn killed back in issue 5, I want to say,
Mhm.
excuse me, in issue 5, wound up in their office after Spawn killed him. It's a little weird figuring out how we got into that in the last episode. But They were on probation because of it. They've just been cleared for duty, and so they're back in business. They're very excited that they're finally going to go ahead and track down Spawn, their red cape friend, who they saw at Billy Kincaid's house. I love Sam and Twitch. First off, I love Sam and Twitch.
They're easily my favorite characters because partly because I haven't met Spawn yet. Like,
That's true.
I know
Also,
that feels.
I love cops. No, I'm kidding.
Well, that's the thing that's frustrating about them is like they are cops, and I'm like, all right, but superhero cops are always a little bit better than real cops, or a lot better than real cops because they live in a fake world
Yes.
where they are good.
Where
Um,
good and evil are material things and not just like
well,
philosophical
and
concepts.
especially in Spawn, they are material things,
Yes.
and these two are pretty lovable. Like I don't have like a better descriptor. They're pretty
Their banter
lovable.
is great. They're kind of the Norm and Cliff Clavin of if Norm and Cliff Clavin were part of SVU, that would be Sam and Twitch, I think, in a lot
Yeah,
of ways.
100%. I have a
And
question.
they're even kind of drawn that way. Go ahead.
Is Sam throwing Twitch
Yes,
or or is Twitch jumping and clicking his heels
I think Sam is throwing him, and I say that because
because
he
of the
says,
caption?
"Watch the ribs."
Right. It has to be, right?
Yes, he's catching him like a baby. And they have this weird slapsticky thing going on. Every time they show up, Todd likes to throw little jokes in there. Todd likes to write little jokes into his stories. He likes to write a lot of little jokes.
He's a funny little
And
guy.
he's a funny little guy. He does little gags. There's a gag here on the end of this page where Sam clearly has a donut stuck to his ass. And then Twitch says, "By the way, sir, you have a donut squished to your ass," which I saw it and I thought, did Todd just draw a little donut on there? And then I got to the caption and I was like, oh, he even pointed, it's like a whole thing. Like,
Also, do you think that years later Jim Lee would draw a bagel with such detail?
listeners, if you could see the Kubrick face I'm making right now, Superman Unchained, you can see the seeds in the bagel. The art is breathtaking.
There's
Oh, God.
I
You
just
know,
sent George into a time warp because there's an issue of Superman Unchained
it's
where
number one.
another reviewer, not that we work with, but that we read, described Jim Lee's drawing of a
Rendering, yeah.
bagel, rendering of a bagel as like so breathtaking.
He was just this reviewer. I don't know his name, their name, her name. I don't know. I don't know this person's name. I'm sure they've done very wonderful work. There was a review where someone was very taken by a bagel, a drawing, a very simple drawing of a bagel. It was like 3 lines.
Dear listener, it was 2 lines. It was 2 circles. It was
Just lovingly rendered. Anyway, oh
was it
boy,
lovingly rendered? Oh boy, I
I
hope
can't
that
remember. He's
I
just
don't
very
want to
into
know.
the bagel.
You know what? Much like the rest of
We're
my
deep in our own
Nerdorama,
personal mythology
I
right
know well, our
now.
personal lore. But you know what? Much like most of my reviews, maybe it's lost to the ether. Maybe it doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's true. So then we catch back up with Spawn. We find out that donut on his ass and all, Sam and Twitch are going to go find out who Spawn is. He's hanging out in his alley. We find out it took him 8 days to get back from Botswana after he killed Chapel, the man who, or didn't kill Chapel, after he confronted Chapel, the man who killed him, and burned a skull onto his face, which Spawn confirms here, you can't even put
Happened.
makeup on it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what happened. He can't put makeup on it. He's totally screwed. And we find out that he's king of the alley. Last issue, he was like joking and hanging out with the alley guys. They were all drinking. He was telling stories, listening to them tell their stories and like farting around literally and stuff. This issue, he's sitting in garbage, brooding about how he's the king of the alley and his position was held while he was gone because the hierarchy is intact.
I'll say this. I love Todd drawing Spawn. I know that doesn't seem like a hot take for a book drawn by Todd McFarlane that is called Spawn. I love him like brooding and like
It's
maybe
another
it's
one of
just
those
that there's not
things.
enough of this in these issues that I am like, give it to me. But
It's another one of those things where you can tell Todd's having a lot of fun drawing it. Drawing
yeah,
brooding Spawn, especially like sulking with his, like he's all curled up with his knees up to his chest and his
and the
cape,
green
going,
eyes.
how could I be so stupid? Because he's upset with himself that he revealed that he's alive to Chapel. I almost said Priest, which is a character that replaces Chapel later on. Uh, Jessica Priest,
We'll
I love
get
you.
there.
Doesn't matter. We talked about it a little bit last episode. He's mad because he blew his advantage with Chapel, letting him know he's alive. I like these big shadows, these images of Spawn
So
lurking in
cool.
the alley with his cape up around his head, casting these big angular shadows. It's very Bram Stoker's Dracula. Like it's very Francis Ford Coppola, kind of like lurky. And as he's lurking, Sam and Twitch arrive in the alley, and they're like, we know he's been sighted here. There's been a lot of paranormal activity, even if it's a young blood, which is like what they call the superheroes, part of the young blood program. They don't have a right to commit murder and kill people. So we got to find this guy. They're confronting the people in the alley, and they're basically just denying they have any knowledge of what Spawn is, who he is, where he is, that he even exists. But Sam suddenly catches a glimpse of Spawn out of the corner of his eye as Spawn is trying to make his way out of the alley to not be found.
This is
They
where
chase him.
the sort of like I think I said it in a previous episode, but like I really loved that Sam and Twitch were getting closer to Spawn by the panels, and this is kind of a continuation of that where they actually show up on the same page together. They just still
Yeah.
kind of miss each other. They haven't been in a panel together,
No,
um,
they haven't. But we're
which
getting
is
closer to
which is
that.
cool. But
And the storytelling of that does continue here, and it is exciting. I do like that element. It's just something that you can tell Todd is thinking about in the way he's telling the story. And honestly, I hate to put it this way, but to have the knowledge to see on the page the work he's putting in for that is
yeah,
nice, considering how much we've danced around the rest of this confrontation for over a year now.
I also love it's a small panel, but I love the long shadows.
Yeah,
I
that's a
love that.
fun panel.
I love that panel. I know he's just like, oh, I want to like reference some movies and stuff, but
It's
like,
very noir. Yeah,
yeah, like, but I don't know. It works really, really, really well. And that's a page with what, 7 panels on it? Like, that is a heavily paneled page. To have a standout in that last panel is really nice. And we go
especially
to,
when you look back at that clown panel that was kind of just a throwaway where he's also standing there in the alley casting a long shadow. That one not as impressive and exciting as this one. When I say impressive, I mean it's not lovingly rendered like a Jim Lee bagel, but it is but but it's exciting that you can see Todd was excited to get that effect so well rendered, and the inking on it is also just it's a really simple, very dashed off kind of panel that's a nice bit of cartooning.
yeah, and it leads to this. It's a great splash. I mean, I really like it. I know it's
I was
super
gonna
simple,
say
but it rules.
I love this one.
It's so cool.
It's just another one of Spawn sitting on a rooftop with his cape spraying out in the wind, making no fucking sense at all these angles. But first off, I'm a sucker for that, for the way that when he draws the very like abstract cape. And also I really like the cityscape in this one. It's a
We should
little more like visually interesting and engaging than some of the ones he's
He
done.
kind of did the opposite of what most artists do with something like this. You usually over render the hero. Maybe you over render the sort of building that is in the foreground, right?
Yeah,
Because that's closest to you and that's what you care about seeing. And then the background is sort of just shapes.
right.
This is quite the opposite.
Literally.
The foreground, the building of the foreground is not poorly rendered. It's fine. It's a building.
Mm-hmm.
Spawn is quite literally a bunch of fucking triangles, and then that don't make any sense. And then the city though is so much more. It's got little details.
The way the blinds on the closer building that's on the bottom left, the way the blinds are all drawn at different heights. It's just
Yeah,
a little touch that's like, this is a real city. And I love that it grounds Spawn in that environment. And it also kind of shows he just kind of blends in a little bit when you start
mhm.
looking at it in these big, he's sort of lost in the city. That's why you can't find one guy in a big red cape.
I mean, I think the thing that's really fun, and I say this as a New Yorker, and George, I think you can speak to this a little bit as somebody
I've
who's been
spent some
here
time.
a bunch of times.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't really fucking care.
Okay, I can say this. I was in New York for SantaCon one year during a blizzard. We saw each other that weekend, and nobody fucking cared that there were 300 Santas walking around.
Yeah, everyone was like, "Oh God, I gotta get where I'm going." And I'm like, "Oh, there's 300 Santas. Yeah, great."
I was trying to catch a cab in a blizzard. I was trying to go just across Manhattan, and I hailed a cab. This guy got out, and I was starting to get in. I had a handlebar mustache at the time because I was really cool. And the cab driver goes,
Bring it back, honestly.
"Oh, I don't go to Brooklyn."
Yeah, once upon a time when there were no Ubers or Lyfts, and cab drivers could tell you that they don't go places.
Well, it's just funny that he saw my handlebar mustache. It was immediately like, "Oh fuck, I'm not driving to Williamsburg in this." As if I had sat down and said, "Take me where people look like assholes." anyway,
Uh,
anyway, Spawn's trying to blend in with the city, and he's doing a great job. I also love the coloring on this page, the sort
it's
of dusky
beautiful.
sundown, because that's when Spawn wakes up. During the day, Spawn is just a corpse in a red carpet laying in an alley, and that's why nobody notices him, because there's 15 others in all the other alleys around. So we cut back on the next page to the Violator's story. At this point, he's established that he's been sent by his master to kill this evil wizard who is the medieval Spawn, and his version of the story is that he's the hero, Spawn's the villain. It's very much the opposite. He is telling these kids that he is going to capture Spawn's mother, the evil witch, who is responsible for all the evil and monstrousness in him. It's very much a sort of Grendel's mom kind of situation.
Right.
I think she's just Grendel's mom.
I will say these, especially the first couple pages, actually, kind of throughout the whole thing, his art is great.
Yeah, he's crushing it. The action really works. The environments, like the moodiness of the trees.
And maybe I'm saying this partly because I just picked up 3 volumes of Excalibur, but Todd kind of has like an Alan Davis thing going on with the hair,
Yeah, he kind of does. You're right.
you know?
And I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. They were contemporaries at this time. So Violator's plan in his version of the story is that he's going to capture the witch who is the mother of the evil wizard and get her to tell him where Spawn is so he can go fight Spawn. What's actually happening is that Spawn, the medieval Spawn, has gotten this young lady to fall in love with him, and she is a painter. Violator is going to capture her and wring information about medieval Spawn out of her. Spawn kidnaps this woman who is medieval Spawn's, not his lover because she's never seen him without his armor on, but his very chaste, very courtly romantic partner. This is a very chivalric love in the tradition of the middle-aged poets. It's a very courtly kind of chaste romance. That eventually leads to Spawn and Violator coming back together. He does find Spawn. He's got the woman with him. And Spawn's like, "You're hiding behind these women's skirts. Face me with honor, you devil's toy."
I love the panel of Spawn with the Violator in the foreground.
Yes, with
It's sick.
his hand there.
It's
It's
so
another
sick.
one. More very hand-oriented storytelling from Todd McFarlane. We're going to talk about this over and over through this podcast anytime we encounter his art, I'm sure, because he often is.
It's not his hand; it's his mouth.
Oh, I think we're talking about different panels. I'm sorry.
Oh, on the one where he's like hiding behind women's skirts. I mean, I love that panel. But right
Yes,
next
yes,
to
yes.
it, that where he's standing and he looks like
Yes,
fucking
I'm sorry. I was looking at the next page, the top panel of the next page. My bad. Yes, that panel where he's standing there framed by the horn and his weird jaw. That is a great panel.
So sick. So sick. And it's the thing that I really like that Todd leans into, and we're going to see this in coloring, I think, in general, where as digital coloring becomes more of a thing, we start to get these like weird gradients. You start to see it a little bit more in this issue, I think, than we've seen previously. But I really like when he starts to block out blacks.
Mm-hmm.
It makes the art much more effective than any sort of gradient would.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway.
Oh, we didn't mention on the panel after the splash page that Clown is colored in this weird bisexual mood lighting, like pink and blue at the top on that panel, which I really like that color scheme. While
All
we're talking about the
bisexuals are
colors,
evil. You heard it here
that's
first.
true. That's right. There's also none of us in hell.
Right, because we're doing Malbolge's work up here.
Yeah. Right. And there are no non-binary people in heaven. I have no place to go. So I'll be wandering the earth forever.
I hope not.
Yeah, I hope not.
Terrible. That sounds worse.
Yeah. So we kind of fuddled through that a little bit, but the next page, at the top of the page, the panel I was talking about, where Violator's hand is reaching out across most of the page. And again, it's Todd using hands often as a very funny foreground device that a very funny, Pierce made balloons fly across their screen while we were doing hand stuff. Hold on, are we not doing phrasing anymore? Sorry,
man.
so Todd
Phrasing.
doing a lot of hand stuff in these pages.
All right.
We'll let that slide.
It.
Yeah. Todd often using hands as a foreground element that take a lot of attention, which a lot of artists, especially in the early 90s, not known to be doing, putting hands and feet first and foremost. But Todd likes to use them as framing devices a lot of the time, literally pointing at what you're supposed to be looking at or drawing the focus of the panels, or even just framing like the tactile nature of a scene with the actual hands. We get this cool this cool panel at the bottom of Violator and Medieval Spawn running at each other, and the fight is off. Violator is quipping that he's got him on the ropes. Things are going in his favor. We get this cool page with the very kind of like, I think it's Sam Savitt kind of horse kicking Violator in the back. Sam Savitt was a Western, drew a lot of covers for Western novels, very known for his studies of horses in motion.
I think they said this in the Neil Gaiman episode, but Todd draws a decent horse.
Mm-hmm.
Like, his horses don't look like total monsters.
No.
Like many artists' renderings of horses do. So.
This one's a little fudged. Like, there's some elements that are not, like the tail is a little funny with another like weird, he's got that wrap on the tail. But overall, the posing is really nice. It's very fluid. And yeah, it's a more legible horse than you get a lot of the time. The 90s was a boom of comic art changing and going different directions, and not all those directions worked.
I have a question about the horse's Spawn logoed saddle situation.
Hit me.
Who's printing that? Who's making that?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it has to be embroidered, right? It has to be either embroidered or painted on.
So he got that like custom made.
I say seamstress, or maybe he magicked it up, or
Oh,
maybe
I
it's
keep
standard
forgetting
issue
about
from
the
Hell.
magic of it all.
Well, because even as they're fighting, even as Violator and Medieval Spawn are fighting, they're talking about how, much like Al Simmons, the modern day Spawn, Medieval Spawn doesn't want to use his magic if he doesn't have to survive this.
Right.
He's just an extremely capable hand-to-hand combatant. Now, Violator catches him off guard and, in his words, he vomits fire and acid at him for 10 minutes. And as he's doing this, he basically turns Spawn's armor into just molten, steel. And it looks like he's killed the medieval Spawn.
I do love the final splash where it's just like him excited that he's won. And it's just Violator looking insane.
Sitting in the wreckage of Spawn's armor, with the steam rising all around him. I like the panel of Spawn getting blasted with fire too. Both the one at the top of the page where you can see his hand like coming out up in front of his head, where he almost looks like an anglerfish because of the hand, but like the gout of flame coming across the page into the next panel, more great spotted blacks that really kind of sell the moment.
Yeah.
And just as the story is finishing, he's saying to these kids, hey, do you want to know what I found in that armor, the wreckage of that armor? And the kids are like, nope, don't give a shit. Your story sucks. And he says, well, guess what? I'm going to pay you to. He pays them to finish the story. And he says that he didn't find a damn thing inside Spawn's armor. He says, you know what I found? Diddly. I had completely disintegrated the poor sucker.
And that's going to lead us to Spawn number 15.
Well, there's one little note here. Next issue, the conclusion, and a new legend is born. Honest, I wouldn't lie. Which a new legend is born thing is just a kind of funny little setup for the punchline of Violator's story. So, going into this next issue, the credits.
Yeah, issue 15 is writing and art, or story and art by Todd McFarlane, letters and editor Tom Orzechowski, color by Steve Oliff and Oli Optics. This one has a different dedication. Martin Nodell.
Martin Nodell, Golden Age artist, creator of Alan Scott, the Green Lantern, probably his most famous creation, except for another character he created, not in comics, but in his long advertising career. Martin Nodell was actually the creator of the Pillsbury Doughboy, which is a very fun thing that I didn't know until I was in high school. When I met Martin Nodell at a local comic shop, somewhere I still have a Alan Scott shirt signed by him.
That's really cool.
Yeah, isn't it? R.I.P. He died a few years ago. He was a very nice gentleman. He was just.
Did he die after we found out that Alan Scott was gay?
I think he did, but I don't know if he cared, and I actually don't want to.
I feel like he probably didn't care, but I always like when creators find out, like, they did this with your character, and they go, cool, or yeah, that's what I always intended for that character. Like
I'm gonna.
it's like
He died in
anytime,
2006. He's a little longer ago than I thought.
yeah, it's like anytime that somebody says to Chris Claremont, like, hey, did you know they made this character gay? And Chris Claremont's like, I
That's
didn't
how
know
I
they
wrote
made
it.
any of the characters straight.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's funny.
Into issue 15, I hate the first page.
It's bad. It's another one of those pages where the lettering is creeping into more and more of the art.
Yeah, I mean, I get why it exists. It is catching us up on everything. But it's and you know what? I will give him and Tom Orzechowski credit here on, like, all right, you're using the shadow of one of the buildings. Great. We still get art towards the bottom that is, relevant to the issue.
It's a hard page to talk about. And this is the page that has that little turn of phrase I like where it says, Clown has been telling them of a campaign against another Spawn fought nearly 800 years ago. This tale, we're quick to point out, involves two victims, the Spawn and the Facts. He also says, by the way, I think he said it was John the Fourth that was the king at the time, who I think was a king of Portugal. There might have been a king, John the Fourth of England, but I know there was one of Portugal. So maybe this is a Portuguese medieval spawn. Does not necessarily look like a Portuguese landscape in these stories, but anyway, just a little history note for
I would
those
say also
wondering.
the armor doesn't seem particularly Portuguese to me.
No, not very. I mean, my knowledge of 1100 era like Portuguese armor,
Anyway, welcome
definitely
back to
not.
Armor Talk. We are the world's foremost armor podcast, and
There
this is,
probably is one, and it probably is called Armor Talk.
I hope it is. We
That'd be
should have
great.
them on sometime. I would
Have us
love for
on.
them. Armor Talk, wherever you are. I would love for you to get into Spawn's armor, medieval Spawn's
Yeah,
armor, and
we'll
Dark
talk
Ages
about it.
Spawn's
Yeah.
armor, because we'll have to get into that one day, post lawsuit.
But yeah, Clown, the page just has this little tiny picture of Clown and these kids, and he says, "You heard me. I completely flame boiled. You heard me not read that panel right. You heard me. I completely flame broiled the little booger," which is funny. You can tell that Todd loves to make the Clown talk, and that's all I have to say about that.
I think it's that Clown is an easy. He's like an easy exposition device.
Yeah, because you can just have him like throw it off the cuff in a casual way.
Yeah, but then he's like, oh, but he would probably say like something funny or like slang or whatever, and then that's when I think it falls apart a little bit because, as you've noted, Todd McFarlane was born 41 years old. He'll die 41 years old, and everything that Clown says sometimes is just like very like, "Hi there, fellow kids."
It's very dad jokey a lot of the time. Like
Yeah,
it's like if you ever have a dad who like makes jokes about farts, he probably sounds a lot like the Clown.
and also like anybody who lives in this alleyway.
Yeah, that's true. Todd, casual conversation is dudes standing around talking about farts and boogers.
Yeah.
And my experience among cis men, that might be real.
You're not wrong.
Yeah. So I don't know. Todd, let us know. Do you talk about farts a lot?
I will say the thing that's great about these issues in general is Violator looks cool. Todd obviously loves drawing him. He's got a weird, stupid mouth. I love like he continues telling the story and he's like, we get the flashback to Violator in his demon form. I love him like crouched with his like weird jaw on the ground. I love the way his jaw frames the maiden that he's
Yeah, where
captured.
he's
Ah, so cool.
yeah, very like crocodile kind of like it's very creepy and cool. I agree.
I also call out to Tom Warzakowski about the lettering to have in those panels the lettering kind of like the bubbles dripping, so
Mm-hmm.
they sort of echo his teeth, like his teeth are coming up, and then
The bubbles are dripping down. Yeah,
it's great.
Violator's bubbles are just dripping with malice, which I like. So he thinks Spawn's dead, but he's not. Medieval Spawn shows up and he cuts off Violator's finger as he's about to lay it on the maiden. He won't lay a finger on her. I don't know how I feel about this 2-page splash.
I think it's
Once again,
bad.
we get a big Violator hand up in the front, which that's again my favorite part of it. But what did you say?
I think it's bad.
I think it's bad. I think the way Spawn is like gripping his own sword blade is weird.
Weird. Why would you do that? Nobody does that. Like it's not. I understand that he had to do something sort of with his hand. I will also say that like now the hand in the foreground thing is starting to become a crutch.
It
I
might
get
be.
I get that it fills up space. The shot's not impactful though.
I mean, it shows you that he cut off his finger,
We knew that in the
but
last page though. It didn't give us new information.
fair. I do like the slime dripping off the stump onto the other finger. I think though, combined with the way Spawn is rendered here, it's a weird page. It's just a weird page. It's just a weird 2-page spread. We find out that Spawn teleported out of his battle gear, and now they're fighting again. Another thing that's revealed about Spawn here, no penis.
That's true.
So
He's a Ken doll down there.
yep, just a Ken doll.
This is Hellspawn Ken.
He's Kenuff. What is it? My Ken is a Hellspawn. My Ken Hellspawns.
The rest of the issue kind of turns into like extended battle scene, right? Like that's
Yes. Some of it's great. I want to say this next splash page of Spawn jumping over Violator,
rules.
the dimensionality of it is bizarre because Spawn's knee is coming down between Violator's head and like the curve of his horn, and he's kind of trying to stab down and back.
There's also a tree falling.
Yes, it's a page that makes less and less sense every instant you look at it, but it also looks fucking sick. And like Violator's like gripping up at Spawn and his hand is all weird and backwards. Spawn's face looks great here. It's another one of those like Spawn's face bathed in shadow except for the teeth and eyes, which is a Todd McFarlane specialty at this point. It kind of goes on the battle. There's, another 2-page, it's not a spread, but it's like a 2-page sequence of action where we're kind of just seeing them deal brutal blows to each other while Violator lies to the kids about how the fight went. But we get a third splash page in this fight, which is Violator gripping Spawn onto his back, and he's got him like over his back under the horn that curves up over his spine, and he's like trying to rip him in half.
Yeah, one of the things I kind of like love is that Todd is just like, I don't care how big I said things were. Sizes of things don't matter. We're just gonna do things that look cool. And does this make any sense? Absolutely not. Does it look cool as hell? Totally.
Yeah, it's very abstract. And again, we get on the page opposite, we get more of those diegetic panel borders thanks to Violator's big curved horn, kind of separating the top and bottom panels. That's fun. Cool. We see the cape kind of creeping up and around Violator, which is actually important here as he's about to destroy the Spawn. He's got him held and he breathes fire on him again. But the cape, as he thinks he's won, the cape comes up and the chains and wrap up Violator. Medieval Spawn, who used magic to escape to use his powers to escape Violator's fire breathing, takes his Vorpal blade and snicker snack. Violator's head goes flying. He's won the fight. Violator is sent back to hell. Very similarly to how he won the fight, how Al Simmons beat Clown/Violator in the modern age back in Spawn number 4. Oh, the other thing here is Spawn calls out Violator for eating the hearts of the children. So that reminds Violator of something that we'll catch up to in 1 second. Before we jump back to the present, Spawn frees the maiden who he was protecting, and she freaks out because she's never seen him without his armor, and he's basically just a walking burned up corpse guy, as we've seen from Al Simmons and other stuff. She wants nothing to do with him, thinks he's a monster, and runs off screaming to tell her tale. Here's where the punchline comes in. We mentioned this before. The punchline to A New Legend is Born, which is where Violator reveals that this woman's tales of him breathing fire led to the rise of the first stories of fire-breathing dragons.
Right. He is the inspiration for dragons, which is...
A New Legend is Born, Pierce.
It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. Again, I said this earlier. It's something that I think was probably a lot more clever to Todd McFarlane than it is to the readers. But for his service, Violator is reformed, and his story finally done. In the present, the kids walk off calling him a bozo and a loser. One of them throws a newspaper at him, and in the newspaper, he reads one of the most hilarious newspaper articles I can imagine. Now, I want to go ahead and point out again, part of the big premise of this entire comic is that Spawn in his life was Al Simmons, a world famous government murderer. Like one of the sexiest men alive and also an assassin. Now, why that's funny to me is the stuff that just gets printed in the newspaper in Todd McFarlane's world of Spawn is so hilarious to me. Clown gets his paper thrown in his face and he's looking at it, and it says, "Police still have no leads in the mysterious deaths of New York's crime lords. The victims were brutally murdered in their offices. One line of investigation is directed toward a renegade Youngblood type or Shadowhawk inspired wacko," because they think Spawn might be one of those. "Even alleged criminal kingpin Vito Gravano, aka Tony Twist before it was changed for legal purposes, Vito Gravano had sent for protection in the form of the Italian bodyguard Overkill. Vito angrily lays blame at the feet of those costume do-gooders." So the newspaper's like, "Hey, Vito Gravano, who do you think's killing your mob boss buddies?" And he goes, "I don't know, but it's the fault of the superheroes that these villains are dying. And I did hire a villain. I'm officially putting that on the record."
Again, Overkill, also a world famous government
He's a world
bodyguard or
famous mafia hitman.
body. Yeah.
They're like wrestlers or like movie stars in this world. People who kill are like famous, well-known faces, which seems counterintuitive to the entirety of like being a guy who hires cyborg assassins.
It doesn't make a ton of sense. I do. There's some good Tom Warzakowski on this page overall, though.
There is.
Like, I love Smek being the like thing when he gets the
paper
newspaper
thrown in his face.
Because Smek, for folks who don't read a ton of comics, I guess, but I don't know why you'd be listening to this otherwise. Usually a kiss sound.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like a wet smacking sound kind of thing.
A little smack.
Violator has the same reaction I have to reading Vito Gravano's thoughts about hiring a cyborg assassin to protect him from superheroes, which is what? In these big green letters. And Violator is reminded of the fact that he ripped out all those hearts and that he is mad that no one is giving him credit and that it's going to some anonymous person, aka Spawn. We're not going to see what happens as a result of that outside in these issues. That will take place in the Violator miniseries that will be released at some point. I think 94 it says here.
That is that's 3 issues written by Alan Moore. George, are we going to cover that?
We'll talk about it. Maybe.
I think probably. It's not that long.
Yeah. No, it's not.
Only 3 issues.
One other thing I want to point out on the newspaper is it says, "PD kills Toddy. Ouch." And then you have this little caricature down here of Peter David, because this must have happened just shortly after, or been created shortly after, Todd McFarlane and Peter David had a debate at Comic-Con where they debated in front of a live audience as to whether artists or writers were more important. I'm guessing, I don't know a whole lot about the fallout of that other than the Coco Swiss, which was like kind of wrapped up in that whole thing, the Coco Swiss. I'm guessing that Todd's position wasn't defended as well in the minds of fans as Peter David's. And I'm going to go on the record again and say art is more important than writing in comics, because art can be writing in comics, but writing, while artistic, can never be visual art in the sense of like the way comic storytelling is done. Tom Warzakowski does a great job of making the words and the dialogue a visual component of the story. That's art as well. I'm not saying it's not, but you could have a comic that has no words in it, but you could not have a comic that has no form of sequential art.
False, because that Alpha Flight issue exists.
I'm going to go ahead and say, though,
I'm kidding.
For the same reason, you know what's funny about that, Pierce, is every time I say this, I expect someone to bring that up. I expect someone to say, what about 3 pages or whatever it was of 9 panels of white? I will not defend that, but I will say the same thing Marvel said, which is it's an artistic choice and it's still sequential storytelling.
I will say that it is a writeristic choice.
Mm.
And writing means that if there was no writing, nobody would draw anything. So
Well, I'm not saying that. I'm saying
I'm
that
just joking.
let's get into a debate right now. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's derail this podcast for another hour. Anyway, no. So the PD kills Toddy. You get it. I just think that's such a funny little chapter in comic history at the time that Todd McFarlane and Peter David, of all people, who I'm just going to go ahead and say you should not give a microphone to at any Comic Con.
Yeah. We're not going to pile on Peter David. I know he's been going through some health things. He's going through it in his own personal life. So, but I will say,
wish him the
yes,
best in terms of his
he's
health.
not,
Absolutely.
He's not great on the mic.
No, we've all had our Peter David moments. Those of us who've been at his appearances. So the rest of this issue is kind of just a diversion. It's about 4 pages of Spawn sleeping in his alley, and some guy comes out of the restaurant and says, Mr. Nunzio doesn't want you sleeping here. And every time I say Spawn, I almost say Todd first. Spawn is like, all right, I'll move along. But the guy's like, I don't give a shit. I'm actually going to kick your ass now.
Gotta
Starts
say,
beating the crap out of him.
In his little, we also don't really know why he has normal clothes.
No, he's wearing normal clothes now
normal
instead
clothes,
of his Spawn outfit.
He looks great.
he Spawn and the guy he's fighting are both dressed like fucking Patrick Swayze in Roadhouse in different scenes. I want to say the second page of this fight where the guy is beating him up, he calls him a smartass, and he says, I don't need no grief from a 2-bit drunk loser. The punch he's throwing at Spawn, if you punch someone with your hand that way, his hand is like angled out and down. That's the worst punch I've ever seen drawn, I think. It looks like he just swung his justice fist at the wrist.
When I was in college, we used to play fighting as a game. And my roommate, I found out then that he did not know how to throw a punch.
Wow.
He punched like that. So
just flailing his wrist around.
Spawn reader when he was a young.
Learned to punch from Spawn. Wow.
I do love the close-up page
of Spawn,
of Spock, Cunch, Swack.
Cunch. Yes. More Tom Orzechowski artwork, I will say. His letters are definitely art.
Orzechowski carrying.
Absolutely carrying. Spawn says, hold still, Tubby. I want to show you something. This guy is drawn. His proportions are all over the place. But he is massive. Considering how big Spawn is, this guy has to be 8 feet tall and 9 feet wide. He's built like a brick shithouse. Spawn finally knocks him over and he says, I want to show you something. And he grabs these 2 pieces of wood and jams them in the ground on either side of the guy's face. And he says, I could have stabbed these through your fucking head. I could have made your brains go on the ground. And the guy's like, yes, sir. And he runs away. Now, this next page is another one of those pages that you used to see this in so many issues of Wizard. This was one that came up that was like a page that was used in different marketing. It was just a page that was very famous of Spawn no longer wearing the clothes he was wearing in the previous page, suddenly naked, holding a 2x4, saying, getting tired of people constantly invading my turf. I might just have to send a long, loud signal. This is Spawn territory.
I mean, I think I think it rules.
It's a great page. It's
page. It's kind of what I've wanted this entire.
That weird hand on the right side of it with the thumb kind of weirdly curled in.
I feel like I haven't spoken about the plot that much this episode, but it's because I don't care about Violator's story because it's kind of inconsequential, and Violator's annoying.
We kind of breeze through it.
But anytime Spawn anytime Al actually shows up, I'm like, this is great, and I love him fighting this guy. I love naked Spawn in an alley. This page looks awesome, and we got 1 page left.
The final page is just a little sequence where Terry Fitzgerald, who is Al Simmons' best friend in life and now married to Al's ex-wife, Wanda Blake, gets a message from his government bosses at the government assassin agency. I forget what it's called. It has a name that was revealed in the previous issue that I think we didn't even address.
It's not the
It's just it's
CIA.
like
It's
the
just like, yeah,
NGDF or something. I can't even fucking remember. But he gets a call from the minions of Jason Wynn, who is the person responsible for ordering the death of Al Simmons, basically telling him stop looking for clues about Al and stop messing around with our files. That's actually not something Terry's doing. That's something Al is doing, looking into his own death. But since they don't know he's alive, they're assuming it's Terry and Wanda. So they give Terry another warning: get the hell out of our shit, or we'll kill you.
I love the way that this ends because, as we kind of established, Terry and Wanda are the most human characters kind of in the whole kit and caboodle that is Spawn at this point. They're the most affected normal people, and Terry has done nothing wrong to this point,
No,
and Wanda
he's
has
done
done
nothing.
nothing wrong.
Anime did
To this.
nothing wrong.
Well, speak to Hayao Miyazaki about that. But I really like the closing captions here. It'll be nearly 20 minutes before Terry moves, and another 40 before he stops sweating.
Yeah,
Boom.
they're
Next issue. We're
nice.
in, we're out.
Very ominous. And next issue we get a tease. It's good old Grant
Grant
Morrison.
Morrison, Greg
and
Capullo.
Greg Capullo. Can't imagine two more opposite people, aside from both being bald.
They must, you know what? In a weird way, feel like they vibe.
Oh, I'm sure they do. Greg Capullo's a very nice fellow.
Sweetheart, an absolute sweetheart. Listeners, the reason we say Greg Capullo is because he sounds like that a little bit, but also it's just fun to do. And
it's endearing.
A gem. I've interviewed him a few times, and he's always just.
I got nothing but nice things to say about Greg Capullo as a guy. I just think it's funny that he has a very gravelly voice, and he's kind of one of those dudes that like he's got that American badass Undertaker thing going on.
Totally.
One time I saw him and Scott Snyder do a panel at some Comic-Con, and Greg Capullo entered from the back of the room, and he ran down the middle of the room high-fiving people like a wrestler on both sides, like doing an entrance. And I thought that was so cute.
I mean, if you draw Batman, I think you can do that. So
yeah,
if you do it for like a decade, especially, I think you can do that. So if you drew X-Force
and Spawn, lots of Spawn,
and a lot of Spawn, and we're gonna get into it next week.
Yes,
not right now. We're gonna talk a lot about Greg Capullo next week. Overall, these two issues, they're kind of nothing. Like nothing happened.
It's just another thing where like the big plot point was being reminded that there was a plot that has not been addressed for 10 issues.
Hey, there's a thing happening. You're not going to see it here, but it's happening. I think some of the art's really fun. I think that Orzechowski seems tired. Maybe it's because he's pulling double duty at lettering and editing, whatever the script is, that he's like, I'm not going to lean into this as hard as I usually do. But I mean, what he does do is great. Yeah, I don't know. I don't love these issues. I'm sort of, I'm pretty lukewarm on them. They're like in Frank Miller issue number 11 territory for me, where I'm like,
Going back through, I thought they were pretty good. When I read them, before recording, I was into the device of how Violator's story worked. And again, as it's one of those things that like, as just a standout thing, it's a fun little folk horror piece, and it's kind of leaning into a little bit of that horror side of Spawn in a way that I think other issues don't. I do think it feels weightless in the overall mythos of Spawn, because we're not really learning a whole lot about Violator other than he sucked at killing Spawn for almost 1,000 years.
Yeah, like he's bad at his job, and Malbolgia already told him that at the end of issue 4 and took away his powers.
Yeah.
So we didn't really learn anything new. We did get to see Medieval Spawn again.
Which, if you love that action figure, was probably a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But again, I kind of agree with you. art had ups and downs. Tom Orzechowski had some really strong moments in these issues. I think some of them did get a little wordy, and I think maybe at some point you got to wonder if he's just like, how much do I have to actually letter in this fucking issue, man? You know?
There's so many words, and I wonder if he'll ever just edit the script down so that he does not have to letter
Well,
quite as
you
much.
wonder if he has already. You know what I mean?
That's also true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a little sort of these issues feel kind of like nothing to me.
Mm.
If they didn't exist, it doesn't take away or add, like it's not super additive, and it doesn't take anything away. It does put Violator kind of back on the board, kind of, but it doesn't really move the needle in terms of the overall plot. So
Mixed bag. Like I said at the beginning, double-edged sword, much like medieval spawns. What did it have? Like probably like a fucking 19 edges.
if that sword could have gotten drawn consistently, then I would have loved these issues. But
That's
it,
the one problem.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's the one problem.
Yep.
Final thoughts.
Final thoughts is, as much as I enjoyed the device and the craft of the story, like just as a standalone thing, I think it's just another diversion and another kind of placeholders wheel spinning before we get back to this actual plot of, the meeting of Spawn, Salmon Twitch, Violator, and Vito Gravano / Tony Twist that's been building since the start of this series. So I think it's just a little bit of a hiccup on that way. Todd likes to do these diversions, and I think that they're starting to serve the series less and less.
Yeah, for me, not a fan of this two-parter. Didn't love it. I get that it puts Violator kind of back on the board. It also gets us some like demony Violator stuff when he's not able to do that, which
Right.
will become an issue moving forward. But um, especially coming off the Coco Swiss, where a couple of other writers were able to do something a little bit more interesting, I am ready for the world of Spawn to expand.
Right.
Todd's not great at that. He's not
No.
great at like setting up things moving forward. The fact that our main villain is basically like a mob boss in the fight between good and evil, where heaven and hell is a large part of it, feels weird. Like it doesn't feel like it super lines up. Some of that will be rectified when Grant gets to do some work.
Yep, it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, I will say it's not a slog right now, because I think what's coming out is entertaining. I just don't think it like really serves the overall story in a really impactful way. So,
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else.
yep. If you have thoughts about this arc of Spawn, you can send us an email, spawnographypod@gmail.com. George, where can folks find you?
You can find my writing every freaky deaky day at newsarama.com, where I have been going strong for almost 15 years. You can also find my social media is always at Crypt Trash, but I rarely use it. Maybe you'll see me on Blue Sky.
Sick. You can find me at PE Lightning on a bunch of stuff. You can find us on Instagram as well at Spawnography. We're on Twitter, whatever it's called, X and Blue Sky and nonsense. George and I are both in bands. You can listen to our bands. Mine is called
Oh,
Power
yeah.
Trash.
Mine's called Hypersleep. We're on Spotify. We're on Bandcamp.
And George also did the theme music for
That's
this
true.
show. So if you
That's
need
true, I
theme
did.
music, you know where to find us.
That's true. Well, everyone, you know what we always say. For Todd so loved the world.
He gave his only begotten Spawn. Have a good one. Bye.
Spawn!